You've seen Leonardo DiCaprio in the Titanic.
Existence appealing, do you?
Well, yes, ma'am, I do.
You've also seen him in Shutter Island.
Honey, school's not in on Saturday.
And you may have even seen him in the movie The Departed. But one movie that most people haven't seen is a movie called The Revenant. Let's do a movie review on the movie called The Revenant. Please like, share, and subscribe. The Revenant is a 2015 American epic Western action drama directed by Alejandro Inarritu. The movie is loosely based on Hugh Glass's experiences in 1823. The story begins with a panning shot of a family lying on the ground. It turns out to be Hugh Glass's family, the character played by Leonardo DiCaprio, who's speaking to his son called Hawk, in an ancient Indian language called Pawnee, telling him that he knows he's scared and he wants his trouble to be over, but he tells his son he must remain strong and vigilant. As the movie continues, we see Glass holding his wife and reviewing his land as it's been destroyed. Meanwhile, Glass and Hawk are walking through the woods with other men from their hunting party stalking elk. Camped by a river in rural Missouri, they are led by a captain whose name is Andrew Henry. As the captain and his men are conversing, a naked man appears that was missing with an arrow in his back. Just then, another man is shot in the neck with an arrow and falls into the campfire. The party realizes they're being attacked by the Arikara Indians, also known as Bree. The men fight back with all they have, and Glass is attacked and almost choked to death, but is saved by one of his men. As the fighting continues, the men make their way to the boats. However, the Indians are looking for a chief's daughter named Palaka, stolen by white men. The men eventually abandon their boats and start hiking upland to Fort Kailaka. During their journey, Hawk is antagonized by John Fitzgerald for his race. You see, Hawk is half Indian on his mother's side. However, Glass intervenes and tells him not to retaliate against Fitzgerald. Later, as he was walking alone, Glass was brutally attacked by a grizzly bear who was with her cubs. As the bear brutally attacks Glass, he feebly tries to defend himself. Eventually, he's able to shoot the bear, but it doesn't kill her. This enrages the bear even more. Glass continues to stab him as they both tumble down a hill, eventually landing at the bottom with the bear landing on top of Glass. Glass's men eventually find him and attempt to attend to his horrible wounds. Meanwhile, the Arikara Indians continue their search for Palaka, eventually coming across French traders and trading furs with them. Meanwhile, the men in a hunting party are trying to carry Glass in a stretcher, but it's only slowing them down. They attempt to carry him up a hill, only causing some of them to slide back down the hill. Henry then covers Glass's eyes and attempts to shoot him in the head, but cannot bring himself to do it. He then offers $75 for anyone who will stay behind with Glass. Hawk and Bridger volunteer, although they all are fully aware that Glass may fully well die. Henry then raises the payment to $100, so then Fitzgerald will stay with Glass until he expires. While Fitzgerald is arguing that this is fruitless, Glass continues to have visions of his dead wife in their village. Then Fitzgerald gets time alone with Glass and tries to convince him to spare the others by just simply dying. As Glass is unable to speak, Fitzgerald has the audacity to tell him to blink in agreement that he should die, knowing full well Glass has to blink at some point. He then holds his eyes open for a long time in defiance, refusing to blink, and simply just closes them. Then in his sick, twisted mind, Fitzgerald thinks it's okay to strangle him. Just then, Hawk sees his father being strangled and attacks Fitzgerald, leading to a brief struggle where Fitzgerald stabs Hawk, letting him bleed out while Glass watches helplessly. As Fitzgerald allows Hawk to bleed out after hiding his body, he later tells Bridger he doesn't know where he's at. And in another heinous act, Fitzgerald tells Bridger he sees Indians. He needs him to come with him late at night when everyone else is sleeping. And as Fitzgerald reaches Glass's body, Bridger can do nothing as he's already dug a hole and dumps him over in it and tries to cover him up. Meanwhile, Henry and the rest of the hunting party are having trouble crossing the river in their efforts to reach Fort Kiowa. And as Bridger and Fitzgerald are trying to reach them, Bridger realizes Fitzgerald lied about the Bree. He then turns his gun against Fitzgerald, who in turn takes it from him and turns it against him, pulling the trigger, but it didn't fire because it was unloaded. As they continue, Glass awakens and attempts to climb out of the dirt, looking for food and warmth. And in a heartbreaking scene, he finds Hawk's body and vows to stay near it, finding a quilt to stay warm, and eventually feeding off of bone marrow and roots. He then uses gunpowder to try and seal the wound to his throat. Later, nearby, the Indians are getting closer, so Glass uses the river to try and escape them. Meanwhile, Fitzgerald and Bridger are still walking. They come across a settlement with burned up bodies. As one woman emerges from her hut, Bridger quietly leaves some food for her. Meanwhile, Glass is getting extremely hungry, eating raw fish from the river, and he walks up a hill and sees a Pawnee Indian feeding off of a bison. Feeling sorry for Glass, the Indian throws him an organ from the bison, which he rapidly eats. Then the Indian notices the horrific bear attack wounds that are starting to rot on Glass. Glass then tells the Indian that his men left him for dead. The Indian in turn tells him that his tribe was killed and he's looking for revenge. Just then, Fitzgerald and Bridger reach the outpost and rejoin the party. Fitzgerald then tells Henry they couldn't save Glass or Hawk and tells a lie and collects his money. Bridger in turn has a conscience and refuses his bonus pay. Meanwhile, back with Glass and the Indian, they move forward. They eventually sit down collecting water in their mouths, and Glass is a bit relaxed. The Indian in turn grabs materials for a sweat lodge and then places the feverish Glass inside. Glass then starts seeing his wife and then starts seeing himself walking towards Hawk, eventually hugging his son. The Pawnee Indian then performs a ritual for Glass's wounds. Once Glass wakes up, the Indian is gone. Eventually he sees he's been hung by the French trappers. As he infiltrates their camp, he notices one of the men is raping a woman. It is Palika. Glass then holds the sickening rapist at gunpoint and lets Palika go. He then takes a horse and lets all the other horses go free. He then builds a fire. The next morning, the tribe searching for Palika begins to attack. Glass barely holds him off with his rifle, but then mounts his horse and rides away. The tribe then follows he and his horse up a cliff, but then he and his horse go over the cliff. The horse dies and Glass is injured again. And as the night falls and the temperatures drop, he has to cut the horse open to get inside of its body for warmth. Once he wakes up, he crawls to a snow cave and carves in the snow, "Fitzgerald killed my son." Later, back at the outpost, one of the French explorers arrives with a canteen that Bridger left when Fitzgerald buried him. Thinking he took it from Hawk, Henry leads a search party in the woods. There they find Glass limping towards them, and they help him back to the camp. The French explorer then tells them that Fitzgerald, he heard, was headed to Texas. Even more so, he'd cleaned out the safe. Henry then confronts Bridger, beats him to the ground, and then confines him to the stockade. But then Glass vouches for Bridger, stating he was only following orders. from the evil Fitzgerald. Glass then proceeds to tell Henry that he saw Fitzgerald kill his son, and he then requests to seek the man out himself after hearing he's headed to Texas. Henry then reluctantly agrees to allow Glass to accompany him on the hunt. And as the two encounter Fitzgerald, they split up to get him from opposite sides. Henry finds Fitzgerald first and plans to bring him back to try him for murder. And as the two men draw their guns on each other, Fitzgerald kills Henry. Glass then finds Henry's body, puts his body back on top of his horse using a branch as a prop, and they ride out in front of Fitzgerald, who starts firing upon them. And as he approaches the body thinking it's Glass, he realizes it's Henry. And at that moment, Glass gets a shot off, wounding Fitzgerald, who starts running. And as they corner each other in the woods, Fitzgerald starts firing upon Glass. Fitzgerald then runs down by the creek where Glass finds him, and they begin to fight. During the fight, Fitzgerald nearly stabs Glass, but Glass grabs a knife and turns it on him. Fitzgerald then impales Glass's hand, however Glass retaliates. On the other side of the creek, Glass sees the Indians who have been searching. They also have Palika with them. He then decides vengeance is in God's hands and pushes Fitzgerald's body over, down towards the Indians. The chief immediately grabs Fitzgerald and executes him. However, they spare Glass because Palika told them that he rescued her. And although he got his revenge, Glass finds himself yet again wandering in the wilderness. Just then, he falls on his knees and sees an image of his wife headed towards the light. And the final shot you see is of Glass's eyes filling up with tears. So this concludes our review of the movie The Revenant, a movie in 2015 that starred Leonardo DiCaprio. Check it out. It's a pretty decent movie, and a totally different performance by Leonardo. Please like, share, and subscribe to Where in the World is Frank and Gina on YouTube. Simply type in Frank and Gina to subscribe to our channel. God bless.